You're not getting any younger, so
it's time to take control of your life and shoot for the stars.
hey you, yes you, welcome to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast, a podcast for people who want to disrupt their lives for a good reason, to make it count. I'm your host, Jen Glantz, and every week I'll drop a new episode with stories from real people just like you, who woke up one morning and decided to make big changes, starting with small things. We'll cover topics like entrepreneurship, love, failure, and self-care. Hey, you're not getting any younger, so let's make this an adventure. Ready? Hey, any youngers, Jen Glantz here. What's up? How in the world are you? Thanks so much for coming back to another episode of the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. Today's episode is about a topic we love to love. Yes, it's all about love. I don't know if you know this about me, but 5 years ago, I did this thing where I went to a matchmaker, like a real life in-person matchmaker. It was this thing I did with Glamour magazine where they filmed me going on a first date, but the first date was arranged by a matchmaker. I had to go to this woman's office in New York City, and I sat down and she read me a list of like 50, 60 questions asking me all about the kind of person that I think is my perfect match. Is this person somebody who likes this? Do they hate this? These were questions I honestly never thought about, but I learned early on with this matchmaker that if I didn't have an answer for her, she got really mad. So there were some questions she asked me like, what color hair should your perfect match have? And I didn't know. I didn't care. But if I said to her, I don't know, she'd get really weird and annoyed. So I would just make up answers. Then a week later, she scours her books of people, I don't know how or who, and she found me this date. So what happened was I met this date at a hotel bar in where was it? I think like Tribeca area. And Glamour came with a bunch of cameras and videotaped our first date, which was weird, but at that point I had been like a serial dater anyway, so it wasn't super weird to do this. And I go there and I meet my perfect match. This person was supposed to check off every single box that I told the matchmaker I cared about. And within 5 minutes of talking to this person, I was bored out of my mind. This was the world's most boring person I've ever met. He was so boring that the producers had to interrupt our date halfway through, pull me aside and say, Jen, I need you to pull personality out of him because he's so boring. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm the kind of person who boring is not an adjective I would ever use to describe me, let alone somebody who's my perfect match. So clearly the whole checkbox checklist, what do I want in a person, failed. The truth is we really don't know what makes a perfect match. And not only that, when we start having all of these things we're looking for in a human being, we narrow down our choices. And I'm not saying that we should ever settle, but I am saying that sometimes we have to be a little bit open-minded. That is totally what I talk about with this week's guest, Marisa Cohen. She's a psychology professor, relationship researcher, and relationship coach. She's the author of the book From First Kiss to Forever, A Scientific Approach to Love. On today's episode, we talk about the science behind love, behind dating, behind finding your first match. And an interesting thing Marisa says is ditch that list of must-haves and instead make a list of non-negotiables. Oh my God, she says so much more. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And hey, as always, if you have 2 seconds, just 2, if you can drop us a review on iTunes, my goodness gracious, it would mean the world to us. It helps more people find the show. It helps me book more and more guests as well. And also, come hang out with us in the secret You're Not Getting Any Younger Facebook group. We're having some crazy cool conversations in there. Hope to see you there. Marisa, thank you so much for coming on the show today. My very first question for you is, how would you describe what you do to somebody that you just met?
So, what I do is I study relationships from an academic perspective. Sometimes I use the term relationship researcher, sometimes I use the term relationship scientist, but both work fine for me. And I have a background in psychology. I'm actually a psychology professor, and I also co founded and formally directed a relationship science lab, which focuses on the academic side of relationships, what makes them successful, and why sometimes they crash and burn.
I love that. And I find, especially in 2019, everyone claims they're a love expert. Everyone has dating disaster stories and they just want to give advice on their mistakes, which I think is wonderful. But I think what makes you different is that a lot of your advice is based on this scientific approach to love. So let's break that down. What exactly does that mean to take a scientific approach to love, and how can that be a little bit more different than the typical advice that people are getting elsewhere?
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for asking that question and bringing that up. People have asked me before, can I call you a relationship expert? And I say absolutely not, because really what makes a person an expert? There are so many individual differences when it comes to relationships and what makes us happy that, it's really hard to be an expert on the topic. I like to study it and I am continuously learning more and more as I go down this path, but definitely not an expert. There are a lot of people out there who claim to be experts, and they all have really interesting stories to tell. And I feel that we can learn when other people share their stories. But again, I think that word expert, I like to reserve that and not really kind of take that out of the equation, I guess. As far as a scientific approach, the reason why it's scientific is because I've done real academic research in the field, and that can be anything from an experimental study to focus groups to even surveys looking at various aspects of relationships. And all of the studies and all of the questions that we ask are grounded in research in the field.
You mentioned something called a science lab, and my mind is just like running through what this looks like. So, can you explain a little bit of that? Because I feel like people are going to hear that and be like, do you have people just like sitting in a lab testing out their chemistry? So, what exactly do you mean by science lab where you have examined these types of relationships?
Yeah, I guess when you say lab for relationships, it probably sounds a lot cooler than it is in real life. We don't have a one-way mirror. We're not watching people. When we have brought people in, it's been mostly for interviews and it's sitting around a conference table just discussing relationships. But really what it is, it's an idea, a concept that we have, and you might see our surveys floating around online. So no physical space necessary, just the ability to collect data from the public.
Do you think that relationships have gotten more complicated nowadays? Because I feel like and I don't know anything, but I'm just thinking like from my parents and my grandparents, their relationships seemed a little bit more simple. They met people who lived nearby, they got married pretty young. Have relationships always been complicated, or is that something that's just new with the times?
I think relationships have always been complicated, but what's complicated about them kind of changes. If you look back historically, I mean, relationships, there was a lot riding on it, and people formed relationships to basically create unions, to bring families together, to join land. I mean, dowry was involved at one point, and relationships were needed for survival, to kind of form together and create like a group. And so relationships have always been complicated, and even like the process of courtship it's evolved over time. So a lot of what we're seeing now with kind of like the advent of and spread of online dating, it's complicated in a different way, and it's kind of shifting the way in which we meet people.
Do you think that do you think that the reason we have relationships is the same as how we used to?
Oh, good question. I I think that's a really hard question to answer, because people get into relationships for different reasons. I listen to a lot of Esther Perel. I think she's a brilliant, brilliant psychoanalyst. And, one of the things that she's always talking about is how much she requires so much from our relationships, which is actually an argument that she gives about why monogamy might be so difficult. Because we expect our partner to push us, to complete us, to take care of us, to expand our horizons, and we require so much from the other person. But I think that there's so many individual differences as to what a person looks for in their potential mate.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because I think that probably, and this is something that I took from the very first chapter of your book From First Kiss to Forever, A Scientific Approach to Love. One of the first things I really loved was when you wrote in the book, while it's important to make sure your partner meets certain criteria, it's vital to realize the more boxes we require someone to check off, the narrower we make our dating pool. And I thought that was so fascinating because I remember when I was dating, my friends, people I knew were like, okay, Jen, make a list of your must haves and what you want. And as I got older and as I dated more terrible people, that list got longer and longer. And then I would go on these dating apps, and literally there was not a human in this world who had all of these things. So I want to talk about that. What are some of the dangers of making these lists and making sure people are checking off all of these boxes? And what's a better approach to finding a person who is a good match for us?
Oh, that's such a great question. There's a lot of danger in having this, concrete list and you're checking off boxes because the more and more requirements that you start to add in there, we're really whittling down the playing field. So even if you go on to one of those online dating sites that have lots of different profiles, not a swipe-based site, but if you start to put in different characteristics, like must be taller than 5'9", must make this amount of money per year, must have this color hair, you start to really narrow down that pool until you wind up with one or two people. Which can be problematic because then you have to take into account, well, is this a person that I'm likely to get along with? Will our personalities mesh? So it makes it really difficult to find a person. And I think that a lot of times we have these preconceived notions of who is the right person for us or what we want out of a relationship. And while sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're not. So it really is important to have this level of self-awareness of who you are as a person and what you want out of life to be able to form strong relationships with others and know what you want from other people. Now, non-negotiables are totally okay. Okay, if you're a religious person and you want to be with someone else who's religious, or if you're liberal or conservative, depending on where you fall on the political spectrum, if you want someone who matches those values, totally understandable. And I think that that's extremely important. But it's when you start to come up with this long, long list of like these minute details that it really starts to become a problem.
Oh my God. And it's also like, how do you even know what you want? I remember I went to a matchmaker and she was asking me a list of like 50 questions. Do you want this or this? And I answered all of them painfully. And then she set me up on a date with somebody, and that person was supposed to be my perfect match, except in person, I was totally appalled by them. I was disgusted. Like we had nothing in common. So do people even know that list of 50 things they even want from a person?
Right, you make a really great point. Great on paper, not so much in real life. And, as advanced these algorithms can get for these online dating sites, and many of them are built upon, giving you quizzes and asking questions and trying to find compatibility with another person, there's something in and above what these algorithms are capable of predicting that they really can't just get at. And that's that chemistry, that interpersonal connection that you can really only test out when face to face with another person interacting with them in the real world.
Oh, I agree. And I met my boyfriend because I did 14 first dates in 1 month, and he was actually date number 15. But how I did it was I did just that. Like I said yes to everyone who messaged me. I would not even talk to them. I would just say, let's meet for coffee because you're right. Like, you can only get to know and judge a person so much through words, but then when you meet them in person, there's a whole other dynamic. And I even found a lot of the guys I met in person who I was not attracted to online were the guys I was more attracted to in person. So it was weird. Like, I really had no clue what I really wanted. And those dating apps, they lead you down like a rabbit hole of just options and conversations that lead nowhere.
I think that that's a really great approach. And I always tell people a couple of conversations back and forth, and then get out there in the real world and meet this person and see if there really is that chemistry between the two of you. Of course, sometimes circumstances might prevent you from meeting up with the other person, but if at all possible, try to avoid these long-term pen pal type of relationships because it's really not doing either party any good.
Totally. And I think a lot of it is that we have these stories in our head we create about people, and then we meet them in person, and you're like, oh my God, you're not that person who I've been thinking about for weeks at a time. So that can be a
Oh,
little
for
bit
sure. That's
dangerous.
such a letdown, too.
Oh my God, the biggest letdown. Like, I would meet someone and be like, it's not even your fault. You're just not the person I was thinking you were, you know? It's like a me problem, totally.
And honestly, with a lot of these dating sites, this whole idea of dating fatigue is a really real phenomenon where people are putting their all into communicating with other people because they want to meet someone. They're being genuine about the whole process and they build up, the whole first meeting thinking, okay, this person is going to be it. And they meet them. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with either person. It's just not a good match, and their hopes are kind of crumbled. And dating can be almost a full-time job because there are so many different sites out there, so many profiles on these sites, and it becomes a really big commitment.
I like how you mentioned the dating fatigue thing, and I totally agree that that's a real thing. And that's when I was dating, I would be downloading and deleting apps on like a monthly basis. So people who are experiencing that dating fatigue, who just want to give up, who are like, I'm never going to meet somebody, what kind of things can they do to get through that?
I think it's really important to listen to yourself. If you get to the point where you're just getting so tired of being on the sites, it almost becomes a chore, pull back, step away, regroup. Because even if you're not consciously aware of it, on some level, that fatigue is going to start to affect you, and perhaps you're not putting your best foot forward when you're actually going on dates. You're essentially, like, approaching a person, meeting them for the first time, and already have a chip on your shoulder because you're going in thinking like, oh, this isn't going to work out. And it can wind up being a self-fulfilling prophecy. Not every relationship, not every date is going to be the perfect date, but if you go into it already self-sabotaging and saying, okay, this is going to be another terrible date. I'm not going to be happy. I don't even know why I'm doing this. You're going in with the wrong frame of mind, and you can create problems that way. So again, listen to yourself, take a break. It's okay, and rejoin the dating sites when you feel up to it.
Amen to that. And one of the things I loved about your book, From First Kiss to Forever, is as I was reading it, I kept thinking, oh my God, Marissa is reading my mind. Like, every single chapter in there, I was like, I have been through this. I am dealing with this. And another major issue that I loved reading about was something you said: men prefer women who are more intelligent. However, men were less attracted to women who outperform them. And this was something I struggled with when I was dating, because when I was dating a couple years ago, I was starting my business. It was blowing up. I was very eager. I was a workaholic. And a lot of guys were totally turned off by that and scared. And I even had some guys were like, whoa, like, you should take a couple steps back. So what is going on with that? And like, what should women know about that? Because that was a crazy thing that I experienced.
Yeah, and this is actually pretty common, unfortunately. Research has shown some gender differences. Women are much more likely to experience something that's known as reflected glory, which basically means that they are much more likely to be able to share in the successes of others. So if their male partner is doing well or gets a promotion, they will feel happy as if the promotion was theirs. So experiencing joy in their partner's joy. Unfortunately, many studies show that men tend tend to be a little bit more competitive, or their self-esteem is more likely to get damaged by their partner's success in a way. So there was this one really interesting study where when men were rating hypothetical partners, they kept saying that they wanted someone who was very ambitious, very successful, very intelligent. And then when it got to the point of rating potential people that they actually could date, they wound up picking a person who wouldn't compete as much with them.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, I think, like, where does that even go back to?
It's very very unfortunate. But the thing that I tell people is be yourself. Don't try to present yourself in a different way just to try to attract a potential partner. If you are a driven, intelligent, smart, fabulous woman, lead with that, and you will find a partner who knows your worth and who appreciates your worth.
Amen. And I went on so many dates, and then my date 15 was this guy who's now my boyfriend for many years, who sat down and said, I know you have a business. I know what you've done. I'm so impressed by it. And I just had this major sigh of relief because he never felt like I was competing with him. He was so interested and attracted to that. So I agree with you. Like, I'm happy I never dumbed myself down for these dates. And I'm happy that when a guy was questioning what I was doing or how hard I was working, I never let that get in the way. And I think that's really important because everyone will find somebody who is a good match for them as long as you just like you said, you truly are yourself.
Right, right. And just to kind of go back to that study, of course, I mean, this was one study with a particular sample. This doesn't generalize to all men. So while it's an upsetting finding, like I said, it's really, really important. Don't settle. You have to be authentically you.
I love it. One of the other, I mean, your book is so fascinating. I can talk to you for hours about it. But one of the other cool things I read was this whole white bear experiment to forget your ex. So I want to talk about the art of forgetting an ex, how to get over people, and this whole white bear experiment phenomenon, however you want to call it.
Yes. So that was a really interesting idea. Is basically, the white bear effect is when someone tells you, don't think about a white bear. Of course, what are you thinking about? The white bear, like nonstop. And, this is what happens when you end a relationship with another person and someone says, no matter what you do, just don't think about your ex. And that's the only person that you start thinking about, and it really just consumes all of your thoughts. So it becomes really challenging to get over a past relationship, especially if that relationship is really important and meaningful to you. So where it's better not to consciously like put up this wall and say, forget him or forget her, it's better off to just kind of focus on the future and other things that will help you fill out your day, such as hobbies, interests, spending times with friends. So using things that are positive to distract you rather than focusing on it's time to cut off my emotions, because we just can't do that.
Do you think it's still worth it to block them on social media, delete their phone number, or is that something that you should get rid of in baby steps too? Like maybe go from checking their Facebook every day to checking it once a week. Like what's your approach on the modern age way of sort of forgetting them?
I mean, it depends on what works for you. Personally, I think it's best not to have that out there, not to, have your ex's profile, pop up on any social media sites. But, if we are curious, even if we block the person, we're going to go and unblock them, take a quick peek, and then block them again. I mean, it's really, really hard. There are ways around it. And, I've had friends who have, blocked an ex on social media and then called me and said, I blocked him. Can you just please check his profile for me? So
Are you speaking about me? Because I'm definitely guilty of that.
well, maybe I was speaking of myself a little bit there too. But, I mean, look, it's natural curiosity. You want to know, like it's a real loss, and you're grieving that loss, and there's pain involved. And for many people, it's they want to try to create that closure, which at times can be very, very difficult. So if it's If it's too difficult for you to just completely cut contact, though that would be advisable, then do it in baby steps.
Is there any science behind love and letting it go? Or, like, I'm just curious to know, like, love that you've had for a person that's now out of your life. Does that just get erased? Does that stick with you forever? Is there any science behind where love goes when a relationship ends?
It doesn't just dissipate. When you form a connection with a person, it's built on, commitment and intimacy. And I mean intimacy in the sense of, total self-disclosure, of letting your innermost thoughts, wants, fears, and desires be known by another person. So it's something that when you feel love for another person, it takes a while to develop and you're really letting your guard down. And when you form that trusting relationship or bond with another person, when the relationship ends for whatever reason, because a person ends it with you, or if you move away or something else happens, that feeling, that emotion, that's still there, and that's going to leave a hole for a while. And I think that that's okay and that's important because it's part of what makes us human. And we have this pervasive desire to want to form bonds with other people. And even when those connections are no longer there, it doesn't mean that the desire to form bonds goes away with it.
I am so happy you said that, and I really love that because I think a lot of people listening feel so guilty for feelings they have for an ex, or just feel guilty in general that they haven't been able to forget them. So I appreciate you letting people know it's okay and that it's something you have to grieve, and that it's okay that it
Yes,
leaves a hole for a while. And I
for
think that that's
sure.
it's such a kind way of looking at it because we beat ourselves up for not being able to let go, but it's not easy. You loved this person.
Exactly. You should never make apologies for your feelings. Your feelings are your feelings, uniquely yours.
I love that. I'm like writing that down to put on a sticky note above my bed. I love it. Marisa, you are awesome. Your book, From First Kiss to Forever, A Scientific Approach to Love, was a game changer, even for someone like me who's in a relationship. I just learned so much for it. Before
Well,
I
thank
let
you.
you go, I want to end this interview like I end all the other ones. So I'm going to ask you one final question. Fill in the blank. You're not getting any younger, so
So it's time to take control of your life and shoot for the stars.
I love it so much. Marissa, please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and your book.
So you can get information about me and my book on my website, and that's www.marisatcohen.com, and that's Marissa with one S.
Amazing. And we'll link to all of that on our website, anyyounger.com. Marissa, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Hey, you. Thank you for listening to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. There are hundreds of thousands of pods out there, so thank you for listening to this one. You can find the show notes for this week's episode up on our website, anyyounger.com. Subscribe, rate, and review the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast on iTunes so that other ears around the world can listen too. Oh, and join our secret You're Not Getting Any Younger Facebook group, where over 1,000 people are talking about how to disrupt their lives, for good reason, to make it count. Until next week, all my love, Jen Glantz.